Hi, and welcome to the Very Good Gardening Podcast. I'm Krista McCoy, teacher by day and gardener by every spare minute of my life, and I'm so excited you're here. Here's something I want you to remember from the very beginning. You don't need a green thumb, you just need to start. Gardening can feel really intimidating, like there's some secret club that you need to be a part of, but I promise there isn't. I started out with red clay, a few seed packets, and a type A personality that had me researching for an entire year before I planted anything. And even then, I had failure after failure. And if you've seen any of my videos, you'll know that I've learned from a lot of those failures, and I want to help you learn from yours. And I want to be very clear, there will be failures, but you just cannot let them get you down. I always say that gardeners kill the most plants because it's very true. Every gardener, no matter how experienced they are, has a crop that just doesn't grow. For me, this year, that was pumpkins. I really missed my big pumpkins in my garden this year, but sometimes it happens and there was nothing I could do about it. The important thing is to keep planting and to keep learning. So today we're talking about how you can learn to grow your first garden. So whether you have a big backyard, a small plot of land, or some containers on a patio, you can grow food and you can grow it well. In this episode, I'll walk you through the 5 major things you need to know before you plant anything. So grab a cup of coffee and a notebook and let's dig in. Get it? Number 1 is knowing your growing zone and your climate. A lot of people make the mistake of only knowing one. A lot of people only know their growing zone and then they tend to fail because they're comparing one growing zone to another. But climate is a huge factor in what you can and cannot grow and when to grow it. Let's take, for instance, my growing zone 7B in Central Maryland. 7B tells me what my average low temps are and what plants are most likely to survive as annuals or perennials in my zone. It is not tried and true. Just because something says that it can survive in a zone as low as 7 does not mean that it will. And it doesn't mean that it will thrive in zone 7 either. That doesn't mean that I won't try, because I will always try to grow something if it says that it's anywhere near my zone. But I never get upset because a plant does need certain conditions and sometimes my area just doesn't have them. Your zone does not mean your weather or your climate. And even then, your property is going to have certain microclimates that will determine whether crops can survive in one part of your yard versus another. For instance, my property is on a small slope, so those beds that are at the bottom of the slope, they're going to get a frost before the ones at the top. And my garden that's close to the house is going to get residual heat from the house because the sun is going to hit the siding and it's going to warm up the garden faster. And as the sun is traveling in the sky, I know that the afternoon sun is going to be really harsh on one side of my garden, but it's not going to be too bad on another side. But these are things that I'm aware of after years of gardening in this space. And what's interesting, my next door neighbor, who happens to be my father-in-law, doesn't have to deal with a lot of these issues. But we have the same overall weather conditions. This is why it's really important to talk to your neighbors before you garden. Ask them if the weather conditions are really what it says online. I know that if I look up Central Maryland Zone 7B, it'll say that we have mild winters. Now, some of our winters can be mild, but anyone that's lived in Central Maryland knows that sometimes we can get a lot of snow. And sometimes we deal with ice and below 0 temperatures, and wind chill that can get well below 0. Now, if you're living in northern Montana, you're probably thinking, yeah, that sounds mild. But mild to me doesn't mean feet of snow, which is what we have been known to get. The point is, ask your neighbors what the conditions are. That's going to give you way more information than anything you can read online. I encourage you to look up what your growing zone is on the USDA website, but also keep in mind that it doesn't tell you the whole story. Look up your climate, ask around, and then develop a better picture of what can grow and when to plant it. Moving on to soil. People say that it's simple. Good soil equals good food, but getting good soil is anything but simple. There is a very small population of gardeners who happen to have amazing soil and they don't have to do anything to it. Soil is such an important part of gardening, so let's break down how to encourage having good soil in your garden. And just a heads up, it might take a while. There are many different types of soil texture, including sandy, rocky, and clay, which is what I happen to have. That's why I went with raised beds, but all of my berries are actually in that clay soil and they love it. Sandy soil is going to be sandy, and you might have a hard time retaining water for your plants. Rocky soil is going to be tough because you're not going to have enough space for your plants to actually access all of the nutrients that they need. And clay soil is going to have the opposite problems from sandy soil because it's going to contain too much moisture, and that can be a really bad time for your plants. Once you figure out what kind of soil you have, then you can use countermeasures to help encourage your soil be the best it can be. And sometimes that can take a season or 2 or 3. Let's say you're super lucky. Your soil is not sandy, it's not rocky, it's not clay. You've got great looking soil. Your next step is to get your soil tested. You can usually get a soil test from your local university extension. That test is going to show you what macronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are in your soil, and it will also tell you what micronutrients like magnesium are in your soil. There are lots of things you can incorporate into your soil, like blood meal and bone meal, that will add those nutrients into your soil. However, you don't want to add anything until you know what your soil is lacking. And then there are some plants like legumes that will add nitrogen into your soil after they've been planted. So legumes would be peas, beans, peanuts. I'll always plant heavy feeders like watermelon or garlic into beds that had legumes in them previously because they will feed off the nitrogen that was left behind. And then there's compost. Compost is going to have to be an episode all by itself because there's so much to learn when it comes to compost. But compost can really be a game changer when it comes to your garden. I encourage you to start a compost if you can, and if you can't, I encourage you to find compost somewhere in your local community. As I said before, my natural soil is red clay, so most of my garden is raised beds. In my raised beds, I will have compost, vermiculite, peat moss, or coconut coir, whichever one I can find. Adding soil into my raised beds helps me control what my plants are growing in and helps amend the soil underneath the beds. I've been gardening in these beds for so long that it's starting to turn my red clay soil into really great stuff underneath my beds. So the next time that someone tells you that gardening is just planting a seed in your soil in your backyard, you can tell them, hey, it's not that simple. Let's talk about basic plant needs. Everyone knows that plants need water and sun in order to grow. But funny enough, not all plants need soil. But if you're trying to grow in your backyard garden, you're going to need that soil. But first, let's talk about sunlight. Different plants have different sunlight needs. Some plants require at least 6 hours of full sun every day, and others can thrive in a little bit of shade. And some seed packets will say that the plant likes full sun, but that doesn't tell the full story. For instance, peppers. Peppers do love full sun when they are fully grown. Once my pepper plants reach maturity, they love sun all day, every day. They would like it if it was never nighttime. However, when they are little, they can be very, very wimpy. When I first put my pepper seedlings out, they need to be in the shade most of the day. How do I know this? Well, my first year of growing peppers from seed, I put them out into the garden because they needed full sun. I hardened them off just like I was told to, and I put them in the full sun, and they died. That's when I learned that small pepper plants, they like to be introduced to the sun a lot longer than other kinds of seedlings. So we put the shade cloths up and then we wait until they have grown to a proper size and then wean them off the shade. They are such babies. And another gardener might experience something completely different, but I will not risk my poor pepper seedling babies dying of sun scorch ever again. There are some cool weather crops that can actually thrive in a shadier area. When I say a shadier spot, I mean that some parts of the day it will be shady, but then other parts the sun will be shining directly on those plants. Crops that in my experience can handle a shadier spot might be lettuce, radishes, or carrots. We've talked about how some plants don't need soil, and we've talked about how some plants can survive without full sun during the day. However, no plant can survive without water. Some plants like my cactuses behind me, they don't need as much water as my pineapple plant right here, but everybody needs water. Plants like consistency more than a schedule. You're probably thinking that means the same thing, but it doesn't. Watering on a schedule can be detrimental to your plants, especially if they are outside. You want to water your plants based on their specific needs at that specific time and not when it's convenient for you. As somebody who is type A, that was a really hard thing for me to learn. I wanted everything to be on a schedule. However, a drought, a sunny day, a rainy day, a storm can throw off how much water your plant is intaking. That's why it's really important that before you water, you check the soil at the base of the plant. This is probably going to upset some people, but I don't recommend getting a water moisture monitor or whatever it is that you call it. I don't recommend that because I want you to get used to knowing what it feels like when a plant needs water and what it feels like when a plant does not need water. Get used to sticking your finger about an inch into the soil at the base of the plant. When your finger comes out, if there's still soil on your finger, then do not water. However, if your finger comes out clean, you might want to consider what kind of plant it is and whether or not it needs water. There is a difference between how I water my tomatoes versus how I water my peppers. Peppers don't mind being a little dry. They do mind having what's called wet feet. So when it comes to my peppers, I let them show me on the outside that they need water before I water them. They're gonna look a little wimpy, they're gonna look a little sad, but then when you water them, they'll be perfectly fine. Peppers are very dramatic plants. But my tomatoes, I never want them to look like that. If I stick my finger in and I notice that it is dry, I am watering that plant immediately. This is why it's really important to know what your plant's needs are before watering as well. Now, this is a hard lesson that every single gardener learns at some point. Overwatering is a lot harder to fix than underwatering. If a plant is thirsty, you give it water. If a plant is overwatered, your options are limited. If the plant is small, you can take the plant out of the soil, try to get as much of that waterlogged soil off of the roots as possible, and then plant it again and not give it any water until it shows that it needs it. But if it is a bigger plant that's established in the soil and you've overwatered it, it's really, really hard. This has absolutely happened to me, and I always find that I really struggle with when to water again. It's a very hard thing for you as the gardener and the plant to overcome, so if you can avoid overwatering, I highly suggest that you do that. Now let's talk spacing. My first year gardening at this level, I planted watermelons about 2 inches apart. You heard me. They did not do very well. Watermelons are very heavy feeders and they immediately died. I think one of them was like kind of trying to climb this very makeshift trellis that I had made. I was like, I want my watermelons to climb. And I had these thin bamboo sticks that I was going to grow watermelon on. Needless to say, I figured out that watermelon need quite a bit more space than 2 inches. But I also learned that there are some plants that you can crowd and they don't mind. I found that snap peas don't mind having multiple plants around one pole. And bush beans can be really crowded and they don't care at all. But plants like tomatoes and carrots and other root crops, they don't like their neighbors to be too close to them. And to be honest, same. Some people say the cucumbers, they don't mind being too close together, but I have found that when I spread my cucumber plants out farther, the more prolific they are. Other people will say that you can heavily plant radishes and you don't need to thin them, but again, I have not found that to be the case. My thinned out radishes usually do better than the ones that I don't. Some people say that you want to plant a head of lettuce a lot farther apart, whereas I just scatter some seeds and some of them are right next to each other. My lettuce does perfectly fine. How did I learn all of this information? Trial and error. These are things you're going to learn as you go. So again, start your garden so that you can learn those lessons now. So now that you know you're going to start, what are you going to grow? This is the number one question that I ask. What's the best plant for a beginner gardener? And my answer is always the same, and no one ever likes it. Grow what you are going to eat. If you love tomatoes, grow tomatoes. You're going to be out in the garden checking every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, to see what is new on your tomato plants. If you do not like radishes, don't grow radishes. Yes, I find that radishes are easy to grow. However, my family really likes radishes. And I say that they're easy to grow, and yet I could not grow them this fall. The harlequin bug just totally took out my patch of radishes, which, again, I'm an experienced gardener, and look at that. I couldn't even grow radishes this fall. A lot of people say that peppers are really hard to grow, and yet my peppers have always done really well in my garden because I am obsessed with them. At the smallest thing going wrong, I am out there trying to figure out how to fix it. That being said, if I were to pick the 4 easiest crops to grow in my garden, I would choose lettuce, bush beans, radishes, and garlic. Now that I have said that, there are going to be so many gardeners saying, I've never gotten lettuce to grow, I've never been successful with bush beans, and garlic never grows in my area. And there are so many factors that make that true for those gardeners, which is why I'm so hesitant to say what the easiest crop to grow is. Those are the easiest for me, and they are not the easiest for everyone. Some people say that tomatoes are super easy to grow, and I have not found that to be the case. I can grow tomatoes now, but I really struggled with tomatoes for at least 2 years before I was like, oh, I've got a good bumper crop here. And when thinking about what to grow, you want to consider your space. Those of you that have containers, you can grow just about anything, but you have to be really creative in how you grow those things. If you want to grow watermelon out of a container, that's awesome. Consider that that watermelon plant is going to climb everywhere outside of that container. If you're growing a vine like a pole bean, make sure that you have some kind of trellis that it can climb up. But really, it all comes down to what you are going to eat. And remember, whatever you choose to grow, focus on the success and not perfection. If you only get 1 bean out of your bush bean plant, show that bean to everyone you know. You better believe that I showed the whole world when I first grew a radish. The radish was this big, it was picked way too early, and yet I was super proud. Gardening is the process, not the end product. Enjoy the growing process, and then that harvest will be all that much sweeter. I know you've heard me say it a bunch of times already, but just start your garden. So what are you going to do this week? Are you going to buy seeds? Are you going to plan out your space? Are you going to dig a hole and plant a plant? You're most likely not doing that last one if you are in the northern hemisphere. However, maybe you're gardening inside. Right now, I encourage you to make a plan. What are you going to grow? How are you going to grow it? Where are you going to grow it? Too many people don't start gardening because of the fear of failure, but failing is a really big part of gardening. When a plant dies, record everything you can remember about that plant's experience. That way you can learn from your mistakes and try again. If it's a quick growing crop, maybe you have enough time left in the season to try again right away. But this time you're more likely to succeed because you have that knowledge. But failing is critical to learning how to succeed in the garden. Once you wrap your head around that, you'll have a lot more fun out there. Remember that gardening isn't about perfection, it's about participation. It's about showing up and trying again. So that's it, the 5 major things you need to know when starting a garden. So start your garden and watch what happens. Pretty soon you'll be one of those people who's bragging about how your tomato plants have true leaves. And honestly, you'll learn more from one season digging in the dirt than you will from watching 100 YouTube videos. If this episode inspired you to start planting a garden, I'd love to hear about it. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Very Good Gardening. I have a 4th Wall account if you're interested in buying a gardening t-shirt or a mug. And I also have a Substack where my paid subscribers get the full recipe from my Harvest to Table videos and some other perks. Next week, we'll be diving into more details of gardening, so make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening. Until then, get your hands dirty, have fun, and grow something very good.